Hey everybody, Dano here, back to talk about the ZWO SeeStar S50. This also could include the S30. I don't have the S30, I just have the S50. But I wanted to talk about EQ mode, and I wanted to talk about some of the updates. As a week ago, this thing now can do 60-second exposures. EQ mode is fully supported by ZWO. You don't have to do some fancy workaround or some trickery to fool this thing and get it to think it's on the North Pole or whatever people were doing. It's fully supported now, and you can actually polar align this thing, which is the next step into this crazy hobby. So, ZWO is kind of getting you into the next step actually with introducing EQ mode, because once you can polar align this thing, then you can polar align something like this mount or this mount. And so, that would be the next step if you want to go further into this hobby, would be to get an actual EQ mount. But I want to talk about the pieces I'm using: this wedge, this dovetail bar. I'm going to talk about some cheaper options. I'm going to provide links to all those. And I'm also going to go over taking flat frames, as they've now introduced a flat shoot. So if you have any kind of dust or vignetting issues on your lens that you can't get cleaned off with like a blower, a flat frame should help. I'm Dano. Let's jump into this stuff and get started on the latest and greatest with the SeeStar. All right, so when they first announced EQ mode, I was like, cool, can't wait to try this. How am I gonna mount this thing in EQ mode? Well, I first started this hobby with a Ioptron Skyguider Pro. I have this wedge right here, and this is a pretty good wedge. It can be a little finicky, when you go to tighten stuff, it can kind of move a little bit. I ended up upgrading to this William Optics. I guess it's the Skyguider Pro, or you could use any kind of star tracker with it. There's two different kinds. There's a low altitude and a high altitude, and I'll have to check and see. I think this may be the low or the high. I'm not sure. I'll have to look and see. But anyways, this is a much improved wedge. The screw is actually, even with the saddle, so it doesn't get in the way or hit the bottom of the SeeStar. This thing is pretty pricey, but it is very smooth and very accurate. And I'll leave the link to this. I think I got this at Agena Astro, and I'll leave the link to this. If you've got the money to spend, this is a great wedge. But there are cheaper options. The Sky Watcher wedge has the big screw. The knob is like really big, and I think it sticks in the way. So a lot of people have been getting just longer ones that sit back. But I'm gonna call this part hell, because
Welcome to part hell.
because this is what happens in this hobby. You're like, oh yeah, I've got the stuff for this. I can just, get it all working. Wrong. It's not how it works. So I had this Astromania dovetail. It's about a 4-inch dovetail, and it comes with the 1/4 screw. Well, I got a 3/8 inch adapter, and I remember watching a video, I think it was Luca Manico, and he said something about the rubber feet on the bottom of the SeeStar. And I was like, yeah, it shouldn't be a problem. So I screwed this thing on, and the first thing I noticed was it's hitting the rubber feet. It's too long when you screw it all the way in. I was like, crap, that's a problem. And so I got some washers, and that is a way, to do it, but I'm really not a fan of using, multiple parts and loose parts and stuff like that. But I did get some washers, and that could work if if you want to go that route. But what I ended up doing was getting this Wyleoct, Yleoct. It's a very short dovetail. It's like 3.5 inches. I think it's it's a couple inches shorter than this one. And what that does is it actually clears the bottom of the SeeStar and those rubber feet on the corners, no problem. So it spins around and it's not hitting anything. And so that's the way I have mine running in EQ mode. And also I'll put a link to these, I think they're called Hit Hut. This is a 10.5 millimeter 3/8 inch adapter that goes on the quarter 20. And the reason why I bought a little bit longer one, because you can see the difference here. This one's pretty short, and that one's pretty long. The hole inside the bottom of the SeeStar is fairly deep, so I just wanted to make sure this thing had a nice secure connection, because it's it's kind of scary when this thing's leaning over like that and you're like, whew, you don't want it to barely be on there, just whoop, fall off. So that's how I'm running mine, is with this fairly expensive wedge. But now I'm going to go over some cheaper options, and I could have went this route as well, but I already had this stuff laying around, so I just wanted to use what I had. If you don't want to spend the money on something like this wedge, and ZWO just released a, I guess it's like a fluid head pan, or pan head, whatever they call them, mostly used in photography. And it has a little handle on it. And really all you're trying to do is just get this thing aligned with your pole star, whether that be in the southern hemisphere or the northern hemisphere. I'm not sure the price of ZWOs, but I'm sure it's probably a little bit more expensive than this Neewer. But there is a Neewer for $39.99 currently, and I think it supports 6.5 pounds, and the SeeStar S50 is 5.5, so that should be enough to support it. And it also looks like it's short enough to where it won't hit the rubber feet. Now, I haven't used it, but from looking at it, it does. The second part I want to talk about is the Skywatcher Star Adventure ball head adapter. Now, and instead of buying something like this dovetail, this thing is circular, and I think it comes with the 3/8 inch screw. And so I could probably use, if you're using a wedge, you could use something like that on the wedge as well. And that's $16. I think this was 20 something. I'll have to look the price up, but that's a little cheaper. I could have went that route. I don't think I saw it until after I ordered this little short dovetail. And then we have the Hit Hut quarter 20 to 3/8 inch adapter. And like I said, this one on here is 10.5 millimeters long. And I wanted to make sure this thing had a nice secure connection, because it is a little unnerving when your SeeStar is hanging over like that so far. You want to make sure it's very secure. You don't want this thing dropping. Okay, so on to the tripod. I use this slick tripod for Milky Way with my SkyGuider Pro. It adjusts up to over 6 feet tall, I think. It's just a nice heavy duty tripod. This is just the legs, and it has the 3/8 inch and the wedge, the William Optics wedge, or I think the SkyGuider, they just screw right onto the tripod, and it just, it's nice and sturdy, and it works. Would I use the included SeeStar tripod for this? Personally, I don't think I would use it. It's so short, and the spread of the legs is not very much. If you do use the included SeeStar tripod, make sure that you have a leg facing the direction that the SeeStar is leaning. Just for, I don't really trust that small one. I always use this bigger one. I'll leave a link to this tripod as well, but you don't have to get this specific tripod, but a bigger, heavier tripod would be, I think you'd feel a little less worried that the thing's going to fall over. So that's just my opinion. I'm sure people are doing it on the included tripod, but myself, I would get a bigger one. All right, so what I like to do when setting this thing is I make sure I have it centered in this little short dovetail, so it's not hitting any of the feet like my Astromania dovetail was. It was catching the feet. So I screw this in, and it clears all the little rubber feet. So I like to loosen it just a little bit with the included screw there, the little handle that comes on the bottom, and I get it perpendicular with the power button, because you want the power button facing up. And so I get this thing nice and even best I can, and then I'll just tighten that down from there before putting it into the wedge. So how this thing's going to work is actually going to be backwards. If I was using a star tracker, this would actually be turned around so you can look through the polar scope at Polaris, which is, you know, what I'm using. With the SeeStar, it's different. So the wedge is normally facing the other way. It's going to be facing towards me this time, because we're going to slide the SeeStar into the wedge, and we want to make sure that the power button is facing up to the sky. So I just slide that in there, and then I secure that and make sure that thing is nice and tight and it's not going anywhere. And the power button is facing me, and the SeeStar is facing north, as close as I can get it to Polaris. You know, if you're not sure if you're close enough just to begin, you can use like a laser pointer or something. Yeah, so I'm going to actually turn this thing on and go through the motions of getting it kind of just close to alignment. All right, so this is how it'll be set up. And you'll notice that this light, the power light, is green. I think that's the indicator that I've got it in EQ mode. It changes colors. And we'll just go, and how you'll change that if you're not familiar with it, you'll just go inside your settings and then go to advanced features. And then you'll go into mount mode right there. And I already have it in EQ mode. And now it's going to show you some instructions at the top here. It's going to tell you to tilt your SeeStar like in the picture and make sure the power button is facing up. And it's going to go ahead and tell you your current latitude. Mine is at 34 and it needs to be down. So what I would do, and this is a thing I noticed the other night, I wasn't, you know, the first few times, or the first 2 times I did this, I skipped this step because I thought, you know, I had set it and I was pretty close. I could eyeball Polaris. I'm pretty used to polar aligning. I skipped this step and I was having problems. So this is something I would recommend doing, is go ahead and get that as close as you can. So I have to, let's see, we have a locking mechanism on this thing. I have to loosen this one. It's been so long since I used it. And then you raise and lower by these 2 in the front and the rear. And you have to loosen. You have to loosen this one in the front. And then you can adjust this one. And then I'll show this is at 33, and I'll just keep turning it. And then we're at 34. Oh, went past it. Now I'm at 34. And so now that I've got that number even, this, I would go ahead and tighten this wedge back down. And when I did that, it moved a little bit, but it's staying on 34. And so now we know we're kind of close, at least on the latitude side. And then I would get polar aligned deviation. And doing it that way, the third time, I actually was able to get better subs. And I could use the longer exposure times. So doing that step I just showed you with getting your latitude as close as you can before you start the polar aligned deviation. And you want to make sure that you have a nice clear sky, because it's just going to rotate around and do some plate solving. And then that's how you're going to adjust your movements based on that. And I wish it was clear enough for me to set up and do it outside, but we've just had clouds and rain, and it's just been terrible this year. Hoping things improve, but we'll see. Anyways, so I'll go over the history of my attempts with EQ mode. My very first attempt, I took it out I polar aligned it, and this was before the last update, so maybe that helped as well. But I took it out, I polar aligned it. I tried 20 seconds. I've never been able to get 20 seconds with this thing in all tasks. I tried 20 seconds in EQ mode, and it was trails. I think it stacked 4 images in 30 minutes. So it wasn't working for me, 20 seconds. I was pretty bummed. But I got 10 seconds to stack, and the cool thing was it was almost like 100% keep rate of 10-second subs in EQ mode. So that alone is worth going through the trouble of setting this thing up in EQ mode, because you can shoot an image all night long. You won't have any field rotation, and I had a really high keep rate. All I wanted was I wanted 20 or 30 seconds to be, fairly high on the keep rate, and I would have been happy. But I was like, hey, at least I'm getting 10 seconds, and it's keeping every frame just about. All right, so fast forward to night number 2, and same thing. I'm just wanting to get 20 seconds. I used a laser. I refreshed, and I did the alignment again, and made sure I was close. I could eyeball it with Polaris and get really close to like just a normal alignment just by doing it that way. But then it was having me move it like way off to the left, and I'm like, there's no way this is right. This is way too far. I mean, I was like fairly close from just setting up, and it had me, I don't know, maybe the saddle, because it's metal, is interfering with something. There is an app I want to talk about called Polar Align Pro, and it has a daytime polar align tool, and you could get close with it. And so that brings us to night number 3, and I think this was after the last update where they added 60-second subs and also flat frames. And maybe they fixed the deviation tool, but I aligned it, and I reset it, and I aligned it again, and I was getting to like 0.1, and I dialed it in as close as I could. First thing I tried was 20 seconds. 20 seconds worked. I was like, sweet, let's try for 30 seconds. I tried 30 seconds. 30 seconds worked. I was like, yes, this is all I wanted. I tried 60 seconds, which honestly to me, the scope is only 250 millimeters, but the sensor is so small, the field of view is really tiny, and unguided, that's really asking a lot. In my opinion, 60 seconds with this thing, I would have been happy with a high rate of 30 seconds, and I was able to get that in my short test on my 3rd night. But 60 seconds, I tried it, and the stars were a little egg-shaped, and it was failing. There were still there were trails, there were some stacking, and so it did work, but I think conditions would have to be perfect, no wind at all. But so it is possible. 60 seconds would be great, but I just, I didn't expect 60 seconds to be a high keep rate, with such a small field of view and no guide system whatsoever. Maybe that's something they could throw in on the Pro, is maybe like a guide sensor, and get you guiding. But really it would have to be an equatorial type deal. But anyways, yeah, so I was happy with 30 seconds, and I actually took these images of the Trifid Nebula after astronomical dark had ended, so it was between astronomical dark and sunrise. So yeah, to me that's going to be huge, getting 30-second subs on a target and shooting it for multiple hours, like 4 or 5 hours. That's really, and I'll take that into something like Cyril or SETI Astro and actually process those subs. I used to not really bother with all the field rotation. The mosaic mode kind of fixed that a little bit, but this really fixes it. you know, especially on, you know, a smaller target, if you don't want to do a mosaic, you can just stay, you know, locked into it for hours and just collect that light. So after that third night with EQ mode, I finally got 30 seconds. The keep rate was fairly high, and I was like, that's all I wanted. You know, 60 seconds was so-so. It did work, but there was some egg-shaped stars and a lot of failed stacks. So, you know, it's maybe worth attempting, but I mean, if it's like 50%, I'll be fine with 30-second subs. At least it's not thousands of 10-second subs. You know, at least you're moving it up to 30 seconds. So every 2 is a minute. So, you know, is it worth the hassle? I would say absolutely, absolutely. You know, if you don't have a wedge or, you know, get you one of those pan heads, it is absolutely worth setting this thing up in EQ mode. You know, I don't even know if I'll bother with Alt-Az anymore. I'll just carry that thing out, and I'll always set this up in EQ, and then I can actually let it run for much longer than I used to in Alt-Az mode. So, well, now let's move on to taking some flats with this thing, and this will be my first one. So I've waited to make this video to take one. So let's see how that goes. What I use to take flats with all of my telescopes, this is a Tracing tablet. I'll put a link to this as well. And I just have like a handkerchief with some rubber bands to kind of diffuse the light.
Ready to connect.
All right. And I have a little portable battery. And I've used this for years to take my flats. Now, you don't have to have something this big for this, but this is what I'm going to use. You can use an iPad or a tablet. You can take a white t-shirt and put it over. I don't know. Some people may have been having problems with the calibration frames, but you know, I keep a blower on mine. I don't know what I did with it, but I usually keep a blower on my SeeStar, you know, and keep all the dust off of it. And I do have a little bit in there, probably some pollen and stuff like that, but I try to keep it, you know, blown off and clean. First thing we want to do is open this arm. Yep. All right. I'm going to take my little dust plug off here and go into the SeeStar settings. I'm going to go into advanced feature. We'll go into image calibration, and then there is a flat shoot option. There's a hot pixels correction. I've never used that before. I don't know how new that is, but I've never used that before. But I'm going to go ahead and shoot this flat. And now, for those not familiar with flats and what they do, they basically will correct any kind of dust or vignetting you have. I have a vignetting problem on my Celestron Edge HD. On the light frames, I mean, you can see it's a lot of fall off in the edges. And then when I take my flats, you can see the corners are dark. And those flats correct it in post-processing. So I keep, you know, I blow this thing off. I try to keep it as clean as I can, but dust is going to get on there. But, you know, we'll take it and see if it helps. But so what I'll do is I power on this little battery, and then the power button is here on the side, and it'll dim it. And what I'm going to do is just hold this up. I'm going to get a nice even area with no, and I need a cleaner shirt or something that doesn't have all this threads in there, but it does diffuse the light. So what I'm going to do is hold that straight up to the SeeStar and make sure that I'm flush against there. Matter of fact, it may be better to tilt this thing or either go all the way up and do like that, but I'm gonna make sure I'm flat up against it, and we're gonna hit shoot.
Welcome to the SeeStar Flat Field Calibration Guide. Flat field calibration corrects uneven.
And so it's gonna show you a guide. I've not seen this. This is my first time doing it, and it's explaining what the flats do. They fix dust spots and vignetting.
Method 1. Sky flat method.
And so I'm just going to skip this little video and I'm going to shoot. You can use a sheet of paper. You can use your iPhone. It's probably big enough if you or a smartphone or a tablet. You just Google like a white image or whatever, and then I would use some kind of like a t-shirt or something just to diffuse the light. And so
electronic device method. Set your iPad to pure white at 80% brightness. Keep
I'm gonna hold that down.
right and place the display flat over the lens, ensuring even coverage. Open the app, go to advanced features, and tap calibrate to start the calibration.
And it says flat shoot succeeded.
Your flat field calibration is complete.
And that's it.
That's it.
That's it. And so that's taking flats. I can turn this thing off, and I guess that'll store it. And as long as you don't get a lot of new dust spots on this thing, that flat frame should last you months. There's no need to take them all the time. The only reason I'll take mine is if I change filters or something. And I'm not sure how that works on here. Since the filters are internal, you may not need it. But when I change filters, one filter might have a little speck of dust on it and the other one may not. So that's the only reason I'll do it every, with a filter change. But with them being internal, I'm not sure. That's something I'll have to look into. But that's my rambling on this latest update. Really excited for some clear skies to come our way, so I can, on a weekend, so I can, maybe try to get 60 seconds to work. But I was really happy with 30 seconds working, and to me, it's worth it to grab a few more pieces of equipment to get this thing in the EQ mode if you don't have them, and it's going to enhance what this little thing can do. All right, thanks for watching. Hope you have some clear skies, and good luck with your SeeStar and polar lining. Take it easy.